Awesome. Hello, everyone. Happy World Ocean Week. And I'm super excited to be able to give a ports program today for World Ocean Week. Before I get started with anything about the program, I did want to get started with some introductions. So first, I wanted to introduce who I am. And my name's Kyle Buchanan. And I work for California State Parks. You can see my patch right there on the side of my shirt. And I've been working for California State Parks for some time now. It's been about 9 years, and it's given me the opportunity to explore all of California. I've been able to work at some state beaches way down south in Southern California and explore some other areas. And now it's time to introduce the park that I'm at right now. So, right now, I work at Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, and this is really, really far north in California. So I wanted to show everyone where exactly I'm at on a map. So let me pull up a map so everyone's familiar with this location. And if you really like this sportscast and summer is right around the corner, you might be able to visit and check out this state park. So I pulled up a map. Might take a moment or two, but you can see on this map some of the surrounding states. You can see Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and some other states. You can see all of California and some of those major cities throughout California. And then at the very top northwest corner of California, you see a red star. And that's exactly where I'm located at right now. So you can imagine that I'm all the way at the very top of Northern California and all the way west, really close to the ocean. So if I were to hop in my car and start driving north, I'd probably get to Oregon in just about 15 minutes or so. And if I were to do the same thing and drive west and head towards the beach, it would take me about 15 minutes as well. So I'm really at that last little corner of California, and it's a super awesome park, as you can see right behind me. And I want to talk a little bit about this park because it's unique for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons why this park is really unique is because it's actually part of a group of parks. So it's part of this weird partnership up here in Northern California known as Redwood National and State Parks. So Redwood National and State Parks is a group of parks. It's actually three state parks, with Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park being one of them, Delnor Coast Redwood State Park being another one, and Prairie Creek Redwoods being the third state park within this partnership. And the partnership is also including the National Park Service. So it's really almost like four parks grouped together into one really large park. So that's where I'm at right now. And I am super lucky to work at this park because right in the middle of the name of this park, Jedediah Smith Redwoods State Park, right in the middle is the word redwoods. And redwoods are super awesome and extremely special for California and the world because redwood trees actually happen to be the world's tallest tree species. So if we look at these trees right behind me, most of these trees are redwood trees or coast redwood trees. And these trees are the tallest trees in the world. And because of that, they're also California's state tree. So we love redwood so much that we actually made it almost like a state mascot for us. And these trees are really awesome. And just to give everyone an idea of how tall a redwood tree can grow, because these trees are pretty far off in the distance and they still look really tall. So just to give you an idea of how tall they actually grow, I want everyone to imagine a football field. I want you to imagine like a stadium sized football field, like something that they play the Super Bowl and professional football games on. And imagine that one of my hands is one of the field goals and my other hand's the other field goal. So the entire football field and the end zones. And if you were to stand that football field all the way up, these redwood trees would be even taller than that football field. So redwood trees can grow up to heights around 380 feet tall. So extremely tall trees, really magnificent, really an awesome time to go hiking in the redwoods. But at the beginning of this program, I mentioned Happy World Ocean Week. So I actually wanted to talk about the ocean as well as our redwood trees. So I wanted to show people just a picture of a couple things about our park, and I'm going to include a picture of the coastline near the park. So this will give everyone an idea of what it's like at Redwoods, what it's like to hike throughout the forest here, and some of those connections with the ocean. So right here, this is actually a picture of this park. This is at Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, and this is just what it looks like to be at the base of one of these super tall trees. You can see I have my coworker standing right next to the bottom of the tree to give us some reference on how wide these trees are as well. So really awesome insight into what it looks like to hike around the forest here. Now, our coastline is extremely beautiful as well. You could see that it's a really rugged coastline. There's a lot of rock outcrops way out there in the ocean, and it's really wild. There's a lot of space for all sorts of different marine animals to hang out in our ocean, and it's really gorgeous. And we really want to highlight that as a park because on our park website, if you go to the National Park website for Redwoods, one of the very first things you see is this statement: so much more than the tallest trees. And that's what I'm going to be harnessing today because our park is really special because some of the tallest trees in the world are here, but we are so much more than just the tallest trees in the world. So we're going to be talking about the ocean and a very special member of our ecosystem here. So we'll cover a couple different things, but I think that was a fair introduction of our park. So everyone's somewhat familiar with Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. You know where it's at on a map, and you know that we are so much more than just the tallest trees in the world. Now, for today's program, we're going to be talking about seabirds. And the program title is actually called Seabird Storytime. So we're going to be diving into the story behind one of the seabirds that live here at Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park and out on the coastline. But before we jump into that, I wanted to ask some of the classrooms a question because we're talking about a seabird and the redwood forest. And I wanted to see if any of the classrooms would like to use the chat box and use it almost as or use the Q&A box and use it like a chat box and chime in maybe some connections between the ocean and the forest that the classroom can come up with. So what connections might there be between the ocean and the redwood forest? What things connect these two places here in Northern California? And I'll give everyone about a minute to answer that question if you'd like. So I see some people mention driftwood, and that's one way that they're connected. These big old trees, when they do fall down and land in the river, eventually they get pushed all the way out to the ocean. Another really key connector. Oh, I see another one. Storms. Yeah, storms affect the ocean and our forest here. So those connect us together, all of the weather aspects up here. I saw also people mentioning salmon and different fish that swim from the river systems all the way in here, all the way out to the ocean and back. So there's certain fish that spend half their life up here in the rivers and creeks in the forest and half their life out in the ocean. And those fish really connect the two locations. Now, the connection I'm going to be talking about has to do with seabirds. And it has to do with a very specific seabird. So this is where we're diving into the program because we're going to talk about a seabird. And we're also going to define what exactly is a seabird for some people. So we'll define what is a seabird. We'll talk about that story between the seabird and the forest. And then lastly, we're going to talk about ways that you can help out this seabird and also how you can help out all of the critters that live out here in the forest, out there in the ocean. So we're going to tackle a couple different topics, but let's jump right up to the top and talk about what is a seabird and what's the seabird that we're going to be talking about today. So to do this, I wanted to pull up a definition of what exactly is a seabird. So let me pull up the picture of the definition of what a seabird is. So right here on the screens, you'll see a seabird is really birds that are adapted to life within marine environments. So this isn't just any bird that you see out on the coast. A seabird is a bird that's really adapted to living out there on the coastline. And those adaptations can look like all sorts of different things. And I wanted to talk about some of those adaptations. So this bird that lives out there on the coastline and lives out in the ocean spends a lot of time in the ocean. So they're adapted to that lifestyle. And one of the ways that they could be adapted could be maybe their feet. And when I think about birds that spend lots of time in water and what their feet look like, the first thing I think about are ducks. And although ducks don't spend time out in the ocean, or some ducks do, but not all ducks, don't spend all of their time out in the ocean, a lot of ducks will spend a lot of time in different rivers and creeks, just like this river right behind me. And this is the Smith River that runs right through our park. And ducks will spend a lot of time at this river. And actually, already today, I've seen a couple ducks just swim by or fly right through the river. And often ducks will have webbed feet. And those webbed feet really help them swim throughout the creeks. So that might be one adaptation that really helps out ducks and seabirds that are adapted to living out on the ocean. So you can think about ducks having webbed feet, and some of the seabirds will have webbed feet as well. And that's one adaptation. That's one way that they're adapted to living in those marine environments. And then there's some other things. I mean, let's actually stick on the topic of ducks. Let's think about how ducks are adapted to living in the rivers. One of the things that I think about ducks is that they're kind of a little bit of a plump bird. They've got some size to them. They're not like a really tiny little hummingbird, because I think if a hummingbird spent a lot of time in the rivers or in the ocean, it'd probably get really cold because it's a really tiny bird and it wouldn't have a way to warm up. So ducks are a bit heavier. And then something else that I'm thinking about with ducks is because they're a bit heavier, when I'm watching ducks fly, I don't see them fly like hummingbirds either. And I don't see them fly like hawks or these really beautiful birds that like to soar in the sky. And if you can imagine, my hand is a bird and I got my two wings on the side. When I look up at hawks in the sky, sometimes they're just gliding around and they don't even flap their wings. And they'll go 5 minutes just flying around in the wind and looking down for prey, but they won't even flap their wings. They're that good at flying in the sky. And when I see hummingbirds fly around, I see them dash between flower to flower, going extremely fast, flapping their wings faster than my eyes could even see. So ducks, though, when ducks fly, I see them flapping their wings really hard as well. I see them putting a lot of effort into flying, but I don't see them having that same precision that hummingbirds have, or that same elegance that hawks have when they're flying in the sky. Ducks are often flapping their wings as hard as possible, and they're moving in one direction. They're going straight, going as fast as they possibly can. And some ducks can fly pretty fast, but they've got one speed and one speed only, and they're flapping their wings going right across the sky. So that's what I'm thinking about when I think about ducks and birds that are adapted to living in the ocean. Now, the seabird that we're going to be talking about today is known as the marbled murrelet. I wanted to show everyone a picture of what the marbled murrelet looks like before we go too deep. So right here's the marbled murrelet. It's a really small bird. If you can imagine, this bird is maybe the size of like a big potato. Maybe like if you put both your fists together and lined them up, that's about the size of the body of a marbled murrelet. So they're really small birds, but they share some of those same characteristics as a duck. They're a bit more plump, and then also in the way that they fly, they're very similar to ducks. When they fly, they're flapping their wings as hard as possible, and they're moving in one direction as fast as they possibly can. For the marbled murrelet, that's pretty fast. These birds can actually get up to speeds around 60 miles per hour. So if you can imagine how fast you're driving on a freeway, that's about the same speed that these birds fly in the sky. So the marbled murrelet has some of those adaptations as well. But also, being a seabird and spending most of its time out in the ocean, the marbled murrelet has these wings that help them fly, but they can also use their wings to help them swim underneath water. And I don't have a picture of this, but if you can imagine when this marbled murrelet sees a fish 20 feet below it that looks really tasty to that marbled murrelet, it'll dunk underneath the water and it'll use its wings to help it swim down to that fish. So not only can they fly, but they're really prolific swimmers. And this is going to be the seabird that we're going to talk about today. So I want everyone to remember what this marbled murrelet looks like and to remember the name of this bird, the marbled murrelet. And it is one of our seabirds, and we're going to be talking about it today. So let's start at the very beginning of this story. And to get to the very beginning of the marbled murrelet story, I want everyone to go back in time with me. So I want everyone to go back, let's say maybe 70 years ago. And let's imagine that we're going 70 years back into the past. And even back then, a lot of people really love the marbled murrelet. It's not just me. There's a whole bunch of people that love this bird. And these people would hop on boats and they'd head out to the ocean and they'd go a couple miles offshore and they'd find these marbled murrelets. They'd grab out their binoculars or their fancy cameras, try to take pictures of this bird and just get their eyes on this bird. They'd be really excited to see this marbled murrelet. And this was true for a lot of people. They'd head out to the ocean. But one thing that these people were noticing was that the marbled murrelet was becoming more and more rare to find on the ocean. It used to be a bird that they would see every time that they go out onto sea looking for seabirds. But as the years progressed, they noticed, I'm not seeing as many marbled murrelets as I used to see. Now, this could be a problem because we really want marbled murrelets to be here, and they're really an important part of this world. So we should probably research and understand why the marbled murrelet is decreasing in population. So it went from recreation and looking at these birds to starting to research these birds. And we had researchers heading out to the ocean. They were looking for the marbled murrelets and they were trying to study the marbled murrelet. And they thought, well, if it's decreasing in population, maybe it has something to do with there being not enough food. So they're looking around for food and they're looking at the same animals that eat the same food as the marbled murrelet. And they're thinking, well, these other seabirds aren't declining in population in the same way that marbled murrelets are. So maybe it doesn't have to do with the food. And they kept looking, they kept thinking, and they kept coming up with new ideas to why the marbled murrelet might be decreasing in population. And once they decided that it probably doesn't have to do with food, they thought, well, maybe it has to do with how the marbled murrelet reproduces and how the marbled murrelet lays its nest and lays its eggs. And they checked all of these really rocky outcrops in the ocean to try and find a marbled murrelet nesting and laying on an egg for the next generation of marbled murrelets. So they were looking for that. And a lot of these other seabirds love to lay their eggs on these rocky outcrops because they're way out in the ocean and they don't have to worry about other predators. So they don't have to worry about foxes bobcats or other animals that might be interested in eating their egg. So the marbled murrelet or so a lot of these seabirds are laying their eggs on these big rocky outcrops in the ocean. And these researchers started taking their boats out to these outcrops and grabbing their binoculars and starting to look for marbled murrelets on these rocky outcrops. And as they're looking for the marbled murrelet, they're not finding a single one nesting. And they scratched their heads even more, and they thought, huh, where does this marbled murrelet lay its eggs? And then they went to the shoreline and they checked different cliffs because that's also a good spot to lay your eggs. You don't have to worry about those same predators because they can't access you on these really steep cliffs. They kept looking around and they couldn't find a marbled murrelet egg. And they just kept scratching their head and they thought, this is probably the missing link. This is probably why the marbled murrelet is decreasing in population. But we have to find their nest to be sure. We have to really know where the marbled murrelet lays its eggs. They couldn't figure it out. And that was sort of the end of the story for those researchers. They never figured out where the marbled murrelet lays its eggs. Now, at the same time that all this is happening out there on the ocean, where people are spending hours and hours, days and days looking for the marbled murrelet's eggs, there was another research project happening here in the Redwood Forest amongst the tallest trees of the world. And this project had to do with finding the tallest redwood tree out there. And this meant that researchers needed to measure how tall these trees really are. I'm going to show you what it looks like when these researchers are studying these redwood trees. Right here is a picture of two researchers climbing all the way to the very top of these trees to measure how tall these trees are. This is an actual picture of people climbing redwood trees, and it's hard to comprehend because this picture only really shows them on the tree and you can't really tell how high up they are. But these researchers would go all the way up to heights above 350 feet tall to measure these trees. So these researchers are doing this, and they're spending a lot of time out there in the forest as well. They're camping out overnight and getting an early start to measure these trees, and they're studying the redwood forest from the very top of its range all the way down south, and they're really trying to learn where the tallest redwood tree is. And as they're camping out and getting early morning starts to measure these trees, something that was really consistent was on the very foggy mornings, as they're making their coffee and getting ready for their day, they would hear a bird fly over the redwoods. And they'd hear it. They wouldn't be able to see it because it's really foggy. And they'd hear it, and it sounded almost like a seabird. They scratched their heads. They thought, what's a seabird doing out here in the forest? I mean, they spend their time out on the ocean. Why would they be here in the forest? And they just scratched their head. And then sometimes when the fog was slightly lighter, they'd actually be able to see the bird flying over them. And they'd see, and it looked like a pretty small bird, almost like a big potato. And they thought, it's a small bird, but it's flying out to the ocean. Oh well, we have a big day ahead of us of climbing trees. And they just ended up to jokingly calling it the fog lark or the fog robin. They thought, both those birds are about the same size and it likes flying in the fog. And oh well, we'll just call it the fog lark or the fog robin. And they continued on with their research. And this was also a very similar experience to a lot of the people that were spending a lot of time out in the forest. And this was true for loggers. This was true for park employees. They would see this bird flying over. They thought, oh, another fog lark. And time progressed until one of these researchers that were climbing the tree And we're climbing all the way up to the top of these redwoods, got way up into the tree, and looked over to the side and spotted the marbled murrelet laying on an egg way up at the very top of these redwood trees. This is a picture of what it looks like when a marbled murrelet is sitting on its egg way up at the top of these redwood trees. And they thought, whoa. And they finally figured out the mystery of where the marbled murrelet lays its eggs and what the foglark actually was. So this was a very exciting feat for these researchers, and they communicated this information with the other researchers that were studying marbled murrelets, and they solved the mystery of where the marbled murrelet lays its eggs. Now, at the same time of solving this mystery, they also solved another mystery, and that was why the marbled murrelet was declining in population. And they realized that this beautiful redwood forest that we have, well, it used to span all the way from southern Oregon all the way down to Santa Cruz. It would span about an 8-hour section of California, and there would be these tall, majestic redwood trees all the way down to Santa Cruz. And nowadays, there's only about 5% of that forest. 5% of that forest. That's like having a dollar bill or like having $100. Imagine if I gave you $100 and all of a sudden you only had $5 left. And that's what these marbled murrelets were dealing with. They had 100% of this coastline to lay their eggs in these very complex and really tall, beautiful trees. And all of a sudden, after only about 150 years, they had only 5% of the old growth redwood forest. So this meant that they only had 5% of the places to lay their eggs. So this meant that their population was declining because of some of these logging operations up here in Northern California. I know it's really crazy to think about, and it brought awareness to the marbled murrelet. Now, this is the story of the marbled murrelet. But I wanted to talk about how we can help the marbled murrelet because the story doesn't end now. And if you go out to the California coastline, there are still marbled murrelets out there hunting for fish. And in this forest, there still are marbled murrelets laying their eggs. And if you show up here at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, you'd be able to hear them flying out to the ocean after laying on their egg all night. And they'd go out to the ocean and go get some food for their babies. And this still happens today. So I wanted to talk about certain ways that we can really help out the marbled murrelet. Now, one of the ways that we can really help out the marbled murrelet, which might sound kind of simple, and I'm going to pull up a picture, but one of the ways that we could really help out this bird is simply by keeping it crumb clean. So when I say keeping it crumb clean, I basically mean if you're ever at our parks and you're sitting at a picnic bench and you're having a nice lunch, just really making sure that you clean up your lunch after eating there. And I'm going to explain why this helps out the marbled murrelet. But this also helps out a lot of different animals because we don't want other animals to associate us humans with food. But why does keeping it crumb clean really help out the marbled murrelet? Well, not only do bears and little squirrels and chipmunks love human food and love to hang out next to these picnic benches to try and get your food, but this cute little blue bird that's on this poster also really loves human food. And this bird is called a stellar jay. So stellar jays love to hang out next to the picnic areas, and you'll see them hanging out right above you, and they're waiting for you to leave some crumbs behind so then they could eat your crumbs. And if we did end up leaving our crumbs, that means that that bird's probably going to start associating those areas with food so that maybe one Stellar's jay was there and it got your food, but then the other Stellar's jays are noticing that that bird's getting food. So they go back with that bird, and maybe the next day there's 5 Stellar's jays looking for food. And then maybe after about a month, there's like 20 of them. And then it keeps increasing and increasing, and these birds will hang out near those picnic areas in the redwood forest. Well, when they're not getting human food, they're going to be flying around those areas in these really large numbers looking for other food as well. And these birds, if there's a lot of them, they might eventually end up finding one of those marbled murrelet nests. And if they find one of those marbled murrelet nests, it sounds really sad, but sometimes they'll actually go after the egg and they'll try to eat that marbled murrelet's egg. And this will stop the marbled murrelet from having the next generation of marbled murrelets. So if we keep it crumb clean, we'll keep all of these Steller's jays dispersed and they won't be able to find the marbled murrelet nest. So this is one way that you can really help out this bird, is just by keeping it crumb clean so that we don't get a bunch of these birds all in one place looking for food. So that's one way that you can really help out the marbled murrelet. Now, the next way that you can really help out this bird is actually associated to a lot of different animals that you can help out. So not only does it help out the marbled murrelet, but it helps out all of the marine animals out there on the ocean, and it also helps out all the animals that live here in the forest. And that is going to be by engaging in community science. So throughout the story of the marbled murrelet, I talked about researchers that were out there on the ocean and researchers that were climbing these trees. And that took a lot of effort. And it also took some money as well. It's not cheap to buy a boat and go out to the ocean to research animals. So that took a lot of effort, it took a lot of people, but there's something that you can do as an individual to engage in research in science. And one of those things is community science, and by using a very special app called iNaturalist. I'm going to pull up the image of this app because iNaturalist is a community science app that you can use to really help out researchers. So this is kind of what the app looks like if you were looking in an app store for the iNaturalist app. It's got a cute little green bird on it. And this app is a location where people just like you and I upload pictures and audio recordings of what we find when we're out hiking or hanging out at the beach. So if I were to go out hiking and I see a bunch of cool flowers and maybe I see a lizard, I see a snake or whatever it might be, and I take some pictures of all these different things that I'm seeing, and I collect all these pictures, and then when I'm back on Wi-Fi or have reception, I open up my app and I upload all these pictures to the app. This app will actually help me identify what those flowers might have been. So as I took the picture, I thought, oh, that's a really cute flower. I don't know what kind of plant this is though. But as I upload it onto the app will tell me what kind of flower that is and all this information about that flower. But then also, this app will collect that data. It'll collect that entry and it will allow it so that different scientists that might be doing projects and might be researching that flower or whatever it might be, can have access to that information. So this app's really good first for helping you identify different animals and different plants, but also it helps researchers collect data when they're doing their research projects. So there's two really good uses for this app. It's really awesome for that reason. And we can actually see how this would have been extremely helpful with the marbled murrelet. Because as these researchers were spending a lot of time looking for the marbled murrelet and looking for its nest, these researchers that were out in the ocean, and there was a different group of researchers here in the forest measuring trees. Well, if those researchers in the forest took a nice audio recording of the fog lark or the fog robin as it flew over, making its noise, if they took an audio recording of it, uploaded it to this app, then those researchers that were out on the ocean would have been able to find that information and figure out that the marbled murrelet was spending half of its life out here in the forest. So that's one thing that these researchers could have used, a nice tool, but iNaturalist didn't exist 70 years ago. I mean, iPhones and different smartphones didn't even exist 70 years ago. So this wasn't something that was possible during that time frame. But currently, this is something that we can use to really help out researchers and engage in community science. So we're seeing how iNaturalist could have really helped out the marbled murrelet. Now, there's something else in relationship to iNaturalist that's super awesome with community science. And that is community science projects. So right here we have Snapshot Cal Coast, and this is an awesome community science event that happens throughout the entire month of June. So it's already started. We're about 4 days into this big community event, and throughout all of California, this community event is trying to get people to get out to the coastline, spend some time at the beach, which is never a bad time. So head out to the beach and take a picture of all the cool stuff that you're finding at the beach. Different shells, if you're in some tide pools, all the different tide pool creatures that are out there. If you see some marine mammals like this cute seal that's on the poster, then you can take a picture of that from a safe distance away. You don't want to get too close to some of these animals, and upload all of those pictures that you're getting onto the app iNaturalist. So this is happening all throughout California, and there's different events that bring people together to do this activity. And you could also do it on your own, and you'll be uploading all this information onto iNaturalist, and it's really going to help out scientists that are studying different things out in the ocean, because it's going to give these scientists a lot more data about what's happening out there on California's coastline. So this is one way that we can really help out not only the marbled murrelet, but everything living out on the coastline of California. So if you want to engage in this community science event, just look up Snapshot Cal Coast, and you can probably find an event that's happening near you that can really help out researchers. So this is something else that you can really do to help out the marbled murrelet. Now, this has been awesome talking about the marbled murrelet, and I have one last fun fact for everyone before we finish today's program, but I wanted to see if any of the classrooms had questions about the marbled murrelet or any of these research projects that I'm talking about. So I'm going to give the classrooms a couple of minutes to type into the Q&A box to see if you have any answers about this. I mean, any questions about this. So I see someone asked, what do marbled murrelets eat? Now that's a pretty good question because they spend most of their time out there in the ocean. They'll eat different fish that live out in the ocean. And one of their very favorite things to eat up here on the North Coast are these fish called smelts. And smelt are only about that large. They're not the largest fish, but marbled murrelets aren't the largest bird either. And they swim in these big schools out in the ocean. And once a marbled murrelet finds one of those schools, they'll dive down. And marbled murrelets can dive up to depths deeper than 30 feet. So they could go pretty deep using their wings to help them swim. And that's what a very popular food for the marbled murrelet to eat. Now let's look back in there. How many eggs will be in a marbled murrelet's nest? Well, it's not exactly the answer you want to hear, but it's about one. One. So this is also a really important thing to mention. They'll put all of that energy every year for just one egg. So if one of those cute little blue birds, the Steller's jays, gets that one egg, that means that marbled murrelet couple is going to need to wait all the way into the next year. So that's a long time, and that's a lot of effort to go to waste if that marbled murrelet egg doesn't make it. So that's really an important question. So thank you for asking that. And then I saw someone kind of lead me into my one fun fact, um, and they mentioned, how does a marbled murrelet nest in a redwood tree? That's a good thing to mention, and I wanted to pull up that picture of the marbled murrelet nest. So let's pull up that picture real quick. So right here we have a marbled murrelet up in a tree, and you'll notice that that marbled murrelet doesn't have much of a nest. In fact, it has pretty much no nest. Because typically when I think about a bird nest, the first thing that pops up to mind is a cute little cradle with a bunch of twigs kind of keeping it together, and something that a bird might have spent a lot of time building so then it could lay its eggs in there. But you don't see that at all with this nest. And a marbled murrelet will actually just lay its egg right on top of a branch. And that's why it's really important for these marbled murrelets to have these really old trees and these really large trees, because large trees also mean large branches. So it needs to be a branch that's wide enough for that marbled murrelet to lay its egg on. So it needs to be a nice wide branch. It also preferably needs to be covered with different mosses that are kind of nice and will keep that egg in place. So they're just looking for a nice branch like that. They'll lay their egg, and they won't use much else to for their nest. So yeah, you could just imagine a really large branch and it's sitting on its egg right on top of that. But the really interesting part is, how does a bird that flies kind of like a duck land on a branch? Kind of has me scratching my head, because I don't know about you, but I personally have never seen a duck land on a tree branch. And I want you to think about that yourself. Have you ever seen a duck land on a tree branch? I've never seen it. I've only seen ducks kind of land into or into different rivers and lakes like that. And typically when I do see ducks land in the river, they're coming in really fast. They come in really fast, and then they almost crash land onto the river. You'll see, like, if you imagine this is the river, you'll see them skip across the top of the river and then eventually come to a nice slow stop. But they never really land on branches. So just like ducks and how they fly really fast and at one speed only, marbled murrelets do that same thing. So I want you all to imagine that my arm is a really large redwood tree, and that this is a really nice branch for a marbled murrelet to lay its eggs on. And that marbled murrelet is flying with my other hand, and it's flying all the way towards that tree. Well, if it's going 60 miles per hour and at only one speed, there's no way that it could just land on that tree branch. It's going way too fast to just stop right away. And what that marbled murrelet actually does is it will find that branch, and then it will fly below that branch. And it will slowly curve upwards, and it will use the force of gravity to help slow it down so that it just plops right on that branch. So that's kind of a funny little story about marbled murrelets. They'll fly to the bottom, they'll use gravity to help them slow down, then they'll plop on that branch. Something else that they'll do is they'll kind of start flapping their wings backwards to kind of slow down. And you can watch ducks do this on the river and lake as well. As they approach the water, they'll start opening up their wings and flapping them backwards to help them slow down. So they're not quite like hawks or like hummingbirds where they can dash and they have really good precision, or they're really majestic up in the sky. They've got just one speed and one speed only. That's because their wings are adapted to do multiple different things. They can fly, and their wings help them do that, but their wings are also really helpful to help them swim. So because of having both of those traits, they don't end up being the most majestic flyers, but they are creative in how they land on those tree branches. So we've talked about a lot of different stuff already. We've talked about the marbled murrelet, seabirds. We talked about the story of the marbled murrelet and how they nest in redwood trees, and some of the ways that we can really help out the marbled murrelet by engaging in community science and really helping these researchers learn about different animals on the coastline and here in the forest by using the app iNaturalist. So hopefully some of you hopefully some of you get out to the coastline this month and enter some of that information onto iNaturalist. It's really going to help out researchers. And I hope everyone has a great World Ocean Week. So we'll see everyone. Enjoy. Have a great week.